Veterans, what if you've been told something about the VA's 100-mile rule that isn't actually correct? In today's video, I'll explain what the policy actually says, discuss common misunderstandings I've seen as a retired VA rating specialist, and show you why understanding this rule can make a difference in your VA compensation claim. Make sure you stick around. Hello, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Dewayne. I got a video for that Kimble, United States Army veteran, retired VA rating specialist, and your VA claim nugget man. Also, make sure you go ahead and hit that like, subscribe, and notification button. If you are in need of a DBQ and Nexus statement for a mental or medical condition, make sure you check one of the links in the description section of this video. A lot of veterans ask me, Dewayne, do you know where I can get a DBQ? Do you know where I can get a Nexus statement? Do you know where I can get an IMO? Check the links in the description section, okay? So today's video, the VA's 100-mile rule as it pertains to DBQs and Nexus statements. And there's people out here on YouTube still lying to veterans, telling them you have to be within 100 miles of that examiner. That is totally false. That is not the way the reference reads. And I chalk that up to miscommunication in the VA's training to those VA employees. Because I think that they're just saying 100 mile, 100 mile. And the VA employee is not going out to the reference and saying, you know what? Let me go look up this reference and see what else is in it. And if they don't do that, that is a problem. There wasn't a 100-mile rule saying that your examiner had to be within 100 miles back when I rated, and it doesn't state it now. All right. So I'm going to show you some valuable information, but give you some nuggets at the end of this video that may help you with this if you decide to go to your private examiner and get a DBQ and Nexus statement. Veterans, if you're filing a VA disability claim for a mental health condition, you know the process can be frustrating and overwhelming. Having the right evidence can make all the difference. That's where Tampa Counseling and Wellness comes in. They specialize in providing mental health DBQs and Nexus statements, helping veterans establish direct service connection for mental health conditions or secondary service connection due to issues like tinnitus, migraines, or back problems. The team at Tampa Counseling and Wellness is passionate about supporting those who serve. If you need expert support for your mental health claim, don't go at it alone. Contact Tampa Counseling and Wellness today. All right, so let's go ahead. Now, this is, oh, wait a minute, people. Got to put on my glasses. You know, I always have to put on my glasses, and I'm going to blow this up a little bit. All right, so this is the manual reference. And the manual reference is the potential indicators of inauthenticity. That is very important that you understand that, okay? And it says, while privately completed DBQs should generally be accepted at face value. Now, I've had veterans tell me they talk to some VA employees and they tell them, oh, you can't get use a public VA DBQ and take it to your private examiner. I even had a third-party rep at QTC tell me, oh, you need to report to the CMP exam because you can't have your own doctor complete a DBQ. And I told her, I said, ma'am, I'm a current rater. And what you just said is a bald-faced lie. You just want me to show up so the VA can pay you that $800, pay your company that $800 something for that visit. Nope, negative, not going to do it. Okay. That was my decision. Okay. Then it says there may be factors that warrant closer scrutiny to assess the authenticity of the information provided. All right. Now, I did a previous video where I talk about DBQ fraud. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. An older video where I talked about DBQ fraud, and then a recent video where I talked about DBQ chop shops. Okay. People, they're out there. Okay. Just beware. They are out there and they're not completing these DBQs correctly. But for the majority of it, I think, and this is just my opinion, the majority of examiners, mental health or psychological or medical, they are doing or completing the DBQs and the Nexus statements the correct way. It's not everybody, okay? And I think some VA employees think it is everybody. They think, oh, veterans, you're going out to get a DBQ, the Nexus statement, you're doing too much. I don't care. I'm going to request the exam anyway. Really? All right, let's keep going. So it states right here, indicators of potential inauthenticity include, but are not limited to the following, okay? But are not limited to the following. The non-VA provider identified on the DBQ, all right? This is where it's important for you, the veteran, to understand this, because if your claim lands on a VA employee's desk, they have asked that training and they didn't come here and review this, you could have a problem. The non-VA provider indicated has contact information that is unverifiable or contains discrepancies, okay? So what they're talking about at the bottom of that DBQ on the last page, signature, got to print the name, there's an MPI, medical license, address, all that stuff. And some VA employees, they do verify that that is an actual doctor. I've done it. Go to Google, and if it's in a certain state, each state has a site where you can verify if that doctor is active, if the license are currently active. And if it's not, guess what? That DBQ is insufficient, and I'm going to request a CMP exam, okay? Next, is located an unreasonable distance, generally more than 100 miles, from the veteran's place of residence, yet the provider reported, this is key, people, regularly seeing the veteran as a patient and or that the examination was completed in person. There it is. In this section, it does not state that your examiner has to be within 100 miles. Well, you're probably saying, well, Dewayne, they said generally more than 100 miles, regularly seeing the veteran as a patient. Okay, people, let's put common sense to this. And I've talked about this before. If you're in Seattle, Washington, and your examiner is in Jacksonville Mental Health, you can do it by Zoom. You don't have to be in person. And it's important for the examiner to notate that on the DBQ. Okay? Maybe in the section where it says evidence review and in the remarks section. And if they're doing a Nexus statement for you, put it in a Nexus statement a couple of times. Hey, my mental health provider is in Jacksonville, Florida. I currently live in Seattle. All of our meetings are done by Zoom. And there's other references that talk about telehealth and telemental. Okay. So if you have to do a highlight review because you get one of these knucklehead VA employees that don't want to use common sense, that's where you start building fact based off this manual reference and manual references that talked about telemedical and telemental. Okay. Now, I got something for you too, Mr. and Ms. Veteran. If you are in Seattle and your examiner is in Jacksonville, Florida, and it's a medical examiner, and they're doing an increase in a back condition for you, and they say they measure your range of motion in person, that may call into question. Okay, because guess what? Those exams have to be done in person because in order to get an accurate measurement, a goniometer needs to be used, even though I hear a lot of veterans saying the VA third-party examiners are not using goniometers. Go figure, right? And they want you to show up and they're thinking that, hey, they're going to do it the right way. It's not all examiners, just a few. I apologize. I digress, okay? So you have to keep that in mind as well. It goes both ways. You can't have your cake and eat it too. But On the VA side, I think the lack of training and the lack of common sense is not being used as it pertains to this 100 miles. Okay. So let's keep going. It states the privately completed DBQ contains information that conflicts with the overall evidentiary record, particularly concerning details that impact the outcome of the claim. People just make sure it's done correctly. And you heard me say this before, and I jokingly say it, but it's true. If that examiner has you looking like you're a tier one operator, you went to Delta Force, you were a Green Beret, you were a Ranger in the Army, you did all those three special forces, tier one components, and then you say, I'm gonna get out and I'm gonna go in the Air Force, and I'm gonna become a pararescue. And you do that 3 or 4 years, you get out and you say, hey, I'm gonna join the Navy and I'm gonna become a SEAL. You become a SEAL, and then you say, I'm gonna get out of the Navy and I'm gonna go in the Marines, I'm gonna do a long range reconnaissance. I think Morsock. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but if you're a Marine veteran, let me know. Okay. And your mental health examiner on paper have you looking like that, but you were just a cook, that's a problem. That is a huge problem. Okay. Something's not mathing. Something's not adding up. Okay. Guess what? You're going to a CMP exam. Okay. If they came across my desk, you're going to a CMP exam. Now, I'm not saying it's impossible, but there may be only a handful of people that have done something like that. Okay. Let's keep going. Signs of improper alteration, for example, inconsistent appearance of text and formatting, such as the examiner's certification and signature section being visually different than other sections of the DBQ. I've seen this, people. I've seen it when I rated cases. Okay. And guess what? You get in the CMP exam. Sometimes, check this out. I know I'm pissing people off. Sometimes I would give a veteran the benefit of the doubt. They had a rep, I would go down to the VSO's office, say, hey, look, I got this problem, but I think we can rectify it if the veteran sends another DBQ that doesn't look like this, and this. And guess what? Either the rep didn't want to talk to me, the VSO, the same VSOs that people, hey, go get somebody that's accredited, those VSOs. And guess what? It wasn't all of them. They didn't want to talk to me. And then if they did, some of them be like, well, you got to make a decision. And I'm like, I'm trying to help the vet out. The person that you representing, you're the accredited person that all these people on social media are talking about, but you don't want to talk to me to help me move this claim forward without stalling it out. All right. CMP exam. And then sometimes I was like, you know what? It's not the veteran's fault. I would defer it. And whenever I deferred it for further development, that would prolong the veteran's claim. But sometimes I would rather prolong that claim, get it right, defer it back to the VSR and say, hey, send the veteran a letter saying, you know, we can't move forward with this DBQ because of X, Y, and Z. Can you send an updated one? Okay. I didn't do that a lot, but sometimes I did. Other times I had to go ahead and schedule that CMP exam. But that just lets you know that with some of these VSOs, not all of them, but some out here are doing. But again, people on YouTube say, oh, go get somebody that's credit. All right. Let's keep going. VA determines the privately completed DBQ is insufficient for rating purposes and orders an examination, but the veteran refuses to report for the examination. Now, this is where I fell into this category. Okay. And my DBQ wasn't insufficient. And I went all the way to the appeal board and I won. And I'm like, how are you going to tell me that my DBQ is insufficient or I don't know what makes a DBQ sufficient when you actually train me? I had QRT pull some of my rating decisions where I refused to request a CMP exam for a veteran and use the DBQ that was of record to grant the benefit. And they agreed with me. Yep, you're good to go. So I'm like, when I did that, I'm like, I'm telling the joke, how can you tell me that I'm not qualified? when I'm doing this for a living and I got the same training you got. I end up winning. Okay. But if you decide to go this route, people, hey, it's totally up to you. Just know what you're doing. Okay. And I'm gonna go up to this other reference because when I saw that, I looked at this too. But again, people, if someone's telling you your examiner has to be within 100 miles, that is totally false. Look at that manual reference, okay? But again, you got to use some common sense. I always say VA employees have to use common sense. Veterans have to use it as well. And I gave you some examples. If you're in Seattle and there's medical doctors in Jacksonville and they're saying that you're regularly seen in the office, you better be able to prove it. Are you flying back and forth to Jacksonville monthly for work or something like that? Can you produce airline tickets? If you did something like that and the doctor says you're regularly seen in your office, hey, I'm not scheduling a CMP exam. I'm going to go ahead and use it. But keep in mind, most VA raters don't think like that. They're not going to apply any common sense. Okay. All right, let's keep going. So it talks about this reference is named Authenticity, if I can get it highlighted there, of DBQs. Okay. So a couple of things I want to point out. It says, in general, as with other items of evidence, DBQs from treatment providers should be taken at face value. However, all DBQs completed by treatment providers are subject to review to ensure the information provided is seamlessly authentic, consistent with the evidentiary record, and free from improper alteration. Only get the DBQs from the VA's website. If you're using a company to complete a DBQ, ask them, hey, where did you get this DBQ? Is it up to date? Because when you get it from the VA's website, you can't go wrong. It's going to be up to date. All right. Then this section here, DBQs released for public use, inform the provider that the patient is applying for VA benefits. They ask that on there, and VA will consider the information provided in processing the claim. The physician's signature constitutes a certification that the information provided on the form is accurate, complete, and current. And VA may, not will, but they say may, request medical information, including additional examinations, if necessary, to complete VA's review of a claimant's application. Let's take that first part. VA may request medical information. What they're talking about there is that VA Form 21-4142. Some VA employees love to send that to the veteran when they send a DBQ. I want to see some other stuff. Man, I'm not going through all that. That's ludicrous. That's crazy. That's outlandish. Why would you do something like that? Okay. Some cases, you have to. I get it. But not in all cases when veteran submits DBQs and nexus statements, okay? Including additional examinations. We already talked about that. There are some cases when veterans did submit a DBQ and nexus statement. Or I give you a better example. You got veterans out there, they just love to go out just to get an IMO and a nexus statement. If you're claiming something secondary, you're going to need an IMO and a nexus statement. If you're claiming some pre-service aggravation, direct service connection, you're going to need an IMO and a nexus statement. So whenever that landed on my desk, just that IMO or nexus statement, and it was actionable and sufficient, guess what? I'm still requesting an exam, but I'm going to request that exam without requesting a nexus. But guess what, people? Raiders are not built that way anymore. VSRs are not built that way anymore. They're just going to request everything. Okay. And it goes on to say, where a review of the DBQ raises questions of authenticity or improper alteration, determine whether additional development is necessary. This may include validation of results by the treatment provider, okay, obtaining medical records and or a VA examination. VA examination is at the bottom, okay? These are in no particular order, right? But validation of results by the treatment provider. I'm going to give you a nugget, people. If you have a private medical or mental health professional to complete a DBQ and nexus statement for you, okay? My suggestion to you is give that examiner permission to answer any VA questions if a rater calls them about that DBQ and Nexus statement. You can give them limited, limited authority, meaning if that VA employee calls, your examiner can only answer questions to clarify that DBQ and Nexus statement. Not, oh, well, how often do the veteran get treated? Nope. I don't have authorization from the veteran to disclose that information. And guess what? They would never call a third-party examiner and ask them, how long have you been treating them? Because guess what? That's not the job of the third-party examiner, is to treat the veteran. They're just there to complete the CMP exam. You just decided to go get somebody that you trust and you feel that's going to do it the correct way. Okay? So these VA employees out here that think that, oh, these third-party VA examiners are holier than thou, man, get out of here. Get out of here. That's crazy. You ought to be ashamed of yourself thinking that way. Okay? All right. So sorry I got a little bit worked up, but it gets to me that some of these VA employees, they're like, oh, I'm requesting a CMP exam. If that examiner states that that veteran, they've been treating that veteran, take it at face value. Okay? But if there's something else in that DBQ that don't look right, then yeah, by all means, request a CMP exam. I'm with you 100% on that. But if you're one of these VA employees, just sit there, you're not following your training, you're not looking at the reference, you think veterans are doing too much when it comes to these private DBQs, you don't need to be working at the VA, okay? But veteran, I'm going to hold you accountable as well. Again, if that information, if it ain't jiving, and you know if it's jiving or not, if it makes sense, if it's inconsistent, you know it's inconsistent. And if you submit it anyway, then if that VA employee requests a CMP exam, guess what? I'm rolling with the CMP. I'm sorry, I'm rolling with the VA employee, because that's the same thing I would do when I rated. Okay. But on the flip side of that, when I went through that process and I looked at, I'm like, okay, let me make sure everything is adding up. And they tried to schedule me for a CMP exam. Negative, Ghost Rider. We not doing that. No. The VA trained me to make sure that these DBQs are sufficient for rating purposes. If not, then yeah, I will schedule a CMP exam. And I gave you an example when I would go to the VSO, those accredited people that didn't want to talk to me. Okay, that other people say, oh, only use somebody that's accredited, but just know what they're doing behind the scenes. Some of them, not all of them, but some of them. Okay, but at the end of the day, that's why it's so important for you, the veteran, to understand these references and regulations, especially when it comes to these VA public DBQs. When you take them to a private doctor or you do a telehealth or telemental, and that examiner is over 100 miles away. So if you're claiming migraine secondary to tinnitus, you don't need to be in person. Why? Most third-party VA examiners, they'll do an ACE exam real quick, fast, and in a hurry. So what's the difference than you doing a DBQ with a medical professional that's over 100 miles away? Okay? Just keep in mind, it's going to depend on who desk it lands on. I've said that before, and I'll say it again. You got some VA employees that are doing it the right way. Then you have some that are not. Okay. So it's the roll of the dice. That being said, make sure you like, subscribe, hit that notification button, and as always, share this video with your fellow veterans. Thank you. Don't be frustrated. Get educated.